See everyone here this morning. Please take your Bibles and turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Glad you led that song, Nate. That's a very, very good song. One of the things you run into sometimes in the songs we sing, some of them are fun to sing and we like the music, but they don't say a lot. That song says a lot, and it's one of my favorites. It's definitely a theologically rich song. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Well, like that song, these two verses say a whole lot, but I'd like to drill in to the first verse and this comment that he says in verse 1, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely. Now, as I think about those words, I think it brings an obvious question to mind, one that you have no doubt asked yourself about these verses, and that is, how do you catch a monkey? I think that's just a logical flow of thought to go from Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 to wondering how you might catch a monkey. I am told, I've read, that the easiest way to do this is to put a jar or a cage on the ground that has an opening big enough for the monkey to get his hand through, but not get his fist that has grasped a banana out. The monkey sees the banana in the jar and he goes over and he puts his hand in and he grabs that banana, but because he's not going to let go of that banana, he can't get his hand out of the jar or cage. And the poacher sneaks up from behind and bags it. There's nothing wrong with a banana. In fact, it's pretty easy to go online and find a monkey with a banana. But when you won't let go of that banana, when you're so tied to that banana that you won't get away, that you can't get away from a dangerous situation, we can get in trouble. And so I want to ask you, what is your banana? What in your life are you clinging so closely to that may in and of itself not be wrong? In fact, it may be something that we have to have in life. But because we cling to it so tightly, Satan is watching for us, looking for us in a moment of weakness that now we've grabbed onto this and won't let go, that we are in his crosshairs and he's going to bag us. I think some of us probably have multiple bananas in our life. And so we're going to work through a few things this morning, things that in and of themselves are not sinful, but that if we hold on to too tightly, they can endanger us. They can become sinful. And they wind up replacing God, who is supposed to be sitting on the throne of our hearts. The first one is very easy, and you probably could guess what the first one's going to be, and that's money. We have to have money. I don't guess we can do a whole lot in this world without it. And, we are such a blessed people that we have lots of it, and we have to use it, we have to have it, we have to earn it, and we have to spend it. But when we cling so tightly to it that it takes our lives over, that it begins to consume us, then we have a problem. And we know what Paul says about this to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6 at verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. You see, there's a difference between those who go to work and accept their paycheck and put it in and pay the bills, and those whose lives are consumed by the almighty dollar. That they will behave in ways they shouldn't, that they are obsessed with it, that they are consumed with it, that they only think about that. And it's when we give that much attention and that much focus to money that we begin to have these troubles, that we begin to pierce ourselves with many pangs. It's been said, I don't know, I've heard Dave Ramsey say it a lot, but talking about money, he says it's a wonderful tool, but a horrible master. And that's an interesting way to think about it. And I think Paul would say much the same way. He's going to go on to say about those who are rich that they be rich in good works. The idea being that they're not consumed with maybe the money they do have. It's funny. It is much like the discussion of beauty in the Bible. The Old Testament talks a lot about it. The Old Testament talks a lot about money. The heroes of the Old Testament are often wealthy men. You get to the New Testament and all we talk about maybe are the dangers of it and how it can easily consume us. And we, like that little monkey who just wants the banana, won't let go of the dollar to pull our hand out, and Satan gets us. And we have to be careful. What about traditions? In and of themselves, traditions are fine. Oftentimes, traditions become that way because they work. We meet at 9:30. That works. And we go to Bible class, and then we have a few minutes break, and then we go and assemble for worship. And that has kind of become a tradition. And I know of a congregation in Tampa, Florida that meets from 2 to 5 on Sunday afternoon. And yes, that sounds weird, but, well, it's certainly not sinful. I guess they don't like football. I don't know. The Bucks aren't that bad, but they go and they have their own things that works for that congregation, and that works out well. Jesus talked about this some. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. This is all about tradition. It's what they grew up doing, and if others don't do that, they're obviously sinning, is kind of how they would think about this. And we have our traditions, and that's perfectly fine, but when we cling so tightly to them, we wind up causing maybe trouble in churches or whatever the case may be. I remember when we were in Russellville, Alabama, and our congregation decided to shift to meeting once on Sunday. Here's what we did, though. We didn't just cut out the nights. We actually attached it to the front of our Sunday morning. So we were still meeting 3 hours on Sunday. Not that God asked us to punch a time clock, but we were still meeting 3 hours. And you would have thought that we had just thrown the baby out with the bathwater. You would have thought that we had spoken against God, denied his son, and gave up all doctrine. And there were some in the area who had a severe problem with it, and the way they talked about it and the way they behaved, and it was kind of odd. Now you're weird if you do meet on Sunday night. Kind of gone the other direction now. But traditions in and of themselves are perfectly fine. I offer an invitation at the end of my sermon. On Wednesday nights we have an invitation. That's kind of a tradition because it works. And so we do some of these things, but as long as we remember that they are traditions, we don't hold so tightly to them. Otherwise, Satan sees us holding on to something that is man-made and not what God has specifically instructed. And we end up putting our focus on the wrong thing and clinging so tightly to it that we put a bullseye on our backs. What about our acquaintances? What about our friends? Friendship is a wonderful thing. We read about friends in the Bible. We know that we have friends. We know that we have to live life on this earth. And so we're going to come into contact with people and they become friends. And some of those friends may not be Christians. And I think that is okay. We're going to work with people. We're going to be neighbors with people. We have to get to know people, especially if we want to convert them. And we're going to have friends. But when we hold so tightly to those friends and we don't notice that they're changing us, that they're influencing us, that they're having a bad effect on us, well, you can't help but think of 1 Corinthians 15, right? Evil companions corrupt good morals. I learned that out of the New King James. This is the ESV. Bad company ruins good morals. You can see this in Rehoboam. Rehoboam goes to the old guys with some experience, his father's counselors, and they say, you need to take it easy on these people. If you serve them, they will serve you. Then he goes to his buddies, and his buddies say, no, show them what a man you really are. I think about David's son, Amnon. And Amnon was in love with Tamar. And he didn't know what to do about it. And he had a buddy give him this horrible advice of how to sneak around and ultimately take advantage of Tamar. And we have to be careful. Friends are good. Friends are great. They can be encouraging. They can be wonderful. They can be helpful. But they can also be a drain. They can be a danger. And so when we have our friends and we see that they're causing a problem, when we see that they're being a negative influence, that we're not helping them, they're actually pulling us down. Are we going to hold so tightly to that banana that Satan is able to come up and get us? And so while we love our friends and we enjoy being with our friends, we need to make sure that we are in control of that situation. Maybe borrowing some of what Paul says about being unequally yoked to unbelievers and the relationships that we have with them. What about our careers and our education? As a people, we are usually defined by our careers. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm a teacher. Well, I'm a firefighter. Well, I'm a nurse. Well, I'm a lawyer. Well, I'm whatever. And I think some of that is pretty natural. We spend 40 hours a week or more doing those kinds of things. And that just kind of becomes who we are. It's something to talk about with others. But when we become so consumed by that career that it maybe affects our lives as Christians, it affects our role as mother and father, husband and wife. When we've attached ourselves so tightly to whatever this situation is that we can't be the Christians we need to be. And I'm not here to judge. That is for you to do. And for you to ask yourself, am I holding so tightly to this banana of a career that I'm not being the one that I need to be? And we think, I worked so hard for it. I went to school all these years and put so much effort and energy into this. Paul says in Philippians 3 verse 7, but whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ. You know, Paul was a hotshot Jew. He was on his way up. If he wasn't already, he was headed towards the Sanhedrin Council. And he was going to be a big shot Pharisee. He'd spent so much time, so much energy, so much effort working towards that, and he said, oh, that's trash. I don't need that anymore. And I want you to notice something. I am fine, listen, please understand me. I am fine talking about the glories and the gift of heaven as being our motivation. I am perfectly fine with that. But I want you to notice what Paul says. Why is he willing to give this up? He's not talking about eternity. He's not talking about heaven. He says, I'll give it up for the simple fact of knowing Jesus Christ. That's how valuable Jesus Christ is. And I'll give up all of this. I'll surrender all of this. And so maybe young people, when your parents warn you about certain careers and places of work that are going to be all-consuming, we need to listen to those things. There's nothing wrong with being a lawyer, as long as you're honest. There's nothing wrong with being a doctor. But you need to understand that those two careers especially, they demand lots of time. And are you going to be able to be the parent that you need to be? Are you going to be able to be the spouse that you need to be? Are you going to be able to be the Christian that you need to be? And does a time come when whatever career you're in that it's affecting you that you say, I've got to stop? Because I can't be with my family. I can't be with my church family. I can't be to my God what I'm called to be. Are we going to hold on to that banana so tightly that Satan gets us? What about confidence? Confidence is a thin line, I feel like. It's a bit of a high wire, tightrope kind of thing. Because much of what we do in life requires some confidence in an area. And I have no problem getting up in front of people and speaking. Some people would say, well, that's confident. It's really not. Maybe it's psychosis. It just doesn't make me afraid. It doesn't bother me at all. Some people, they have to work up to the confidence to get up and speak. And we talk about, no, have some confidence and do what you need to do. For a little while, Tiffany was making some cakes, and she made a wedding cake. And I remember I was having to drive her to the place, and here is this beautiful, gorgeous cake, and we're driving there, and I don't even want to drive. I'm terrified that something's going to happen to this cake. And I asked her, I was like, how on earth did you do this? How did you have the confidence to make this woman's wedding cake when she's going to remember this the rest of her? That just overwhelms me. And she goes, how do you get up in front of people every Sunday and talk? Oh, well, okay. And so we all have these things that we do that require some confidence in our lives, but we got to be careful. Let anyone who thinks he stand take heed, lest he fall. So this is actually in the middle of a discussion of idolatry and food offered to idols and eating meat offered to idols. And the idea is that some understand better. They know that the idol is nothing, that this wasn't even offered to anything, and idolatry doesn't affect them. They can walk in and out of the market. It's not a problem to them. And he says that may be true, but remember, take heed, lest you fall. And so as we think about our confidence that we may need, that we're working towards, let's not cross over into arrogance, where that can be a very thin line. And I'm not here to judge you. You understand how you think about these kind of things. And that's what we need to be careful about. When we hold so closely to our confidence that maybe I'm no longer willing to listen to what advice people may have for me, or to listen to an older preacher give some thoughts, or to the elders' input on something. Well, now I'm putting a bullseye on my own back, and I need to make sure that I am listening, that I am willing to do what needs to be done, and that I am not overconfident, that I am not arrogant. What about desire? the word that's translated desire is sometimes translated lust. And the idea behind it is simply desire. Now, when we use the English word lust, we usually use it for a desire of something we don't have a right to, for something that is sinful or wrong. But desire in and of itself is not right or wrong. It's a feeling that we might have. We might have a desire to marry this woman and make her our wife. And that would be perfectly fine if I'm free to marry and she's free to marry. But if I'm married and she's married, now we have a problem. And how do we respond to these desires? What do we have these desires for? A couple of passages here, both from James. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. You see, we have this desire within us, and we begin to maybe focus on it too much, and it begins to grow, and then sin comes in and starts to take advantage of that, much like Paul talks about sin and the law in the book of Romans. James 4, verse 1, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And so we have these desires. Some of the desires are perfectly fine. Some desires are okay. Some desires can be healthy. But when we overemphasize them, or when we start desiring the wrong thing and we lose control of that, we see what happens. And we hold on to that banana so tightly that Satan finds us an easy target. Let's do one more. And then we'll talk about the real problem. What about our temper? We usually just put this in the category of being a bad thing. Oh, I have a temper. Well, technically, we all have a temper. It really seems to refer to the edge of a blade. And we think about a temper, and really when we say, oh, I have a temper, what we mean is I have a short temper is the idea, or I have a short fuse, that something very easy can anger me, can set me off, and wind up behaving in a way that I shouldn't behave. But I think we can see in Jesus' dealings in the temple that Jesus also had a temper. And that Jesus goes into the temple that day and he sees people behaving in a way they shouldn't be behaving, turning his Father's house into a den of thieves, and his temper is what causes him to do what he does. He doesn't respond in a way that's sinful. He doesn't respond in a way that is ungodly, but his temper moves him to act against these individuals. But we also see that it can go too far. In 1 Samuel 25, when David is dealing with Nabal. Do y'all remember that story? Nabal and his wife Abigail. We know Abigail. We love Abigail. David had been kind of hanging out with some of Nabal's servants and taking care of them and protecting them. And so he sends a note to Nabal and he says, hey, do you have any supplies you could share with us? And Nabal actually insults him when he says no. And David loses it. And David tells him, put on your sword, we're going to wipe this guy out. And so he actually has a short temper there. He overreacts in that scene. And Abigail stops a mass slaughter saves her whole family, and David says, you saved me from sin. Because David was giving opportunity to the devil. I want you to think about the last time you were angry. I mean, really angry. I mean, ready to spit nails, as my mother would say. You want a nice southern phrase? This is my mom's. I'm so angry I could bite a bear in the face. That's a good one. You know how mad you have to be to bite a bear in the face? And I want you to think about how you felt in that moment of rage. And what are you more likely to do? I'll confess for a minute. I'll tell you exactly what I'm more likely to do. I'm very likely to use language that's not becoming of a Christian. When I allow myself to feel that rage, that's the first thing that goes. And I can almost hear Satan say it. It'll make you feel better. You can make your point if you say that word. Or maybe it's violence. And you want to hit something. Does it not surprise anyone else how many baseball players are still punching walls, even though one or two break a hand doing it every year? But they get mad and you have no more defense. In that moment, your defenses come down and Satan can use you like a puppet. And you're spitting language you shouldn't be saying. You're doing things you shouldn't be doing. You're thinking thoughts you shouldn't be thinking. And you'll actually try and harm someone you love, even if it's just words, in that moment of anger. And yet, I'd like to read with you a couple of passages in Nehemiah that maybe you haven't noticed before. Nehemiah 13. Let me give just a little bit of background here. Nehemiah had heard that things were not going well in Jerusalem, and he approaches the king and he says, I really need to go to Jerusalem and help them rebuild the walls. And the king says, oh, absolutely. Take what you need and go to Jerusalem and build the walls. And they build the walls in 52 days. They build the walls. Things were great. And he has to go back to the king, and then when he comes back a second time to Jerusalem, things had kind of gotten bad with the people. They weren't faithful like they needed to be. And I want you to notice some of the things that Nehemiah does that seem to be held in regard. Nehemiah 13, at verse 8. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. Can you imagine if you walk in and John and Monty are tossing tables and chairs out the front door because something has gone amiss? What has happened here? And in his anger because of them rebelling against God, he behaves like this. In verse 25. And I confronted them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. I don't know if that one is, if we're able to emulate that one or not, but that'd be kind of interesting, wouldn't it? Stumble upon John and Monty talking with somebody and John reach over there and pull out a hunk of hair. And I told you we're not going to behave like that. And then verse 28, and one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me. One of the things I do think about this is that Nehemiah is not acting out of vengeance, that Nehemiah is not acting out of anger because he has been wrong. Nehemiah is acting, his temper has come to its limit, and he is acting because these people have wronged God. Please understand, I'm not saying we should follow every example here. I don't think that's always the best way to behave there. Proverbs also talk about a stick for the fool's back. We don't do that either. But you see how he used his temper here to achieve something, to clean the house of the Lord here. But we need to understand what Ephesians 4 verse 26 says. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. And we could keep going. If we were in a Bible class, we'd go around the room. What else is a banana in our life that in and of itself is fine? In and of itself is very neutral, but by clinging to it, we endanger ourselves. Sports, hobbies, politics. Are y'all not glad the election's over? Fame. There are things in our lives that are just a part of life, and they're okay. But when we hold so tightly to it that it replaces God on the throne of our hearts, then we get ourselves in trouble. I'd like to read two passages with you, please. 1 Kings 11, at verse 1. What is the problem? Why do we do this? Why do we see that banana and we're so enticed by that banana that we grab it and refuse to let go? 1 Kings 11 at verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with them the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after other gods. Now, I realize I'm talking about something that was specifically negative and outlawed there, but we're getting to the root of the issue here. You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after other gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart from other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods. What we see from this passage, and I understand a little bit of a difference here, but what we see is when you wind up clinging to something so tightly, is that thing has a habit of knocking God off the throne in your heart. And we hold on to that so tight. It is so important to us. It is so imperative to our lives that we remove God from where he rightly belongs, and we're no longer following the Lord wholly as we should. One more passage to turn to, and that's Deuteronomy 6. That's the problem we see in 1 Kings 11. Let's see the solution. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's sons, by keeping all his statutes, his commandments, which I tell you, all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. If we put God on the throne of our hearts, if we get our priorities straight, then we'll know when that banana has become a trap. We'll know when that banana has become a snare, and we need to, in the language of Hebrews 12, set it aside. That sin which so easily ensnares us, we have to get rid of it. And Jesus talks about this as well. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? But we think, I have a right to this banana. There's nothing wrong with this banana. And what we're doing is refusing to deny ourselves. And the minute we refuse to deny ourselves, Satan shows up with that big black bag and is just waiting to get us. What's your banana? I told you it was a logical question. It's something for us to think deeply about as we read Hebrews 12. Do we surrender all? Told Nathan we'd be singing or talking about temptations and priorities. And I can't think of a better invitation song than this. We have these bananas and we think that's not a problem, that's no issue. They're neutral, they're not a bad part of my life. And yet they begin to carry us away. In that moment we must stop and remind ourselves to surrender all to Jesus. To count those things as rubbish. To let go of the banana, pull our hand out of the jar, and get out of there. Running right back to God. I'm sure, well, if you're a human like me, that you have bananas in your life. And there are things that you maybe need to get out of your life. And there are things that you need to surrender. And you can commit to that this morning. You can repent of your sins. You can believe on Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And you can be buried with him in the waters of baptism where your sins are washed away by his blood. And you can rise to walk in new life this morning if you'll come now while we stand and while we sing.